Have you ever bought something and later realized you didn't actually want it or agreed to something just because it felt awkward to say no? That feeling is more common than you think. Hello and welcome back to Bookworm. Today we're diving into influence, a book that explains something slightly unsettling. People can predictably influence your decisions, not because you're weak, because your brain uses shortcuts. Fast decisions, automatic reactions, psychological triggers, and most of the time, you don't even notice them happening. That's why scarcity works, why authority works, why social proof works, because your brain is constantly looking for signals telling it, what should I do? And once someone understands those signals, they can shape your behavior surprisingly easily. Stay with me as we dive deeper, because after this, you'll start noticing persuasion everywhere. And if you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to like and subscribe.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the hidden machinery behind human choices. We're going to unpack the fascinating psychological shortcuts and persuasion principles that quite literally govern our everyday decisions, basing our entire exploration on Robert Cialdini's groundbreaking work, Influence, Science, and Practice. We all really like to think of ourselves as perfectly rational beings, right? We imagine we're carefully weighing the pros and cons of every single decision we make. But the reality is far more complex, and honestly, a whole lot more mechanical than we'd like to admit. Today, we're exposing the psychological triggers that completely bypass our critical thinking and push us right into compliance. So, let's start with this very simple but incredibly startling question. Have you ever just walked out of a store with an item you absolutely never intended to buy? Or maybe you agreed to do a favor for someone when you literally didn't have a spare second in your day? We've all been there. And we're introducing a massive concept here. The fact that we very often respond on complete autopilot instead of consciously analyzing a situation. The core, central idea of influence is that human decisions are heavily affected by deep-seated psychological shortcuts. We are going to look at exactly why people comply even when they originally had absolutely zero intention of doing so. And to understand that, we first have to understand the environment we live in. Picture the absolute chaos of a place like Times Square during rush hour. It is the perfect metaphor for our modern daily lives. It's incredibly complex, it's fast-paced, and it is utterly saturated with information. Because of this absolute avalanche of change and choice coming at us constantly, our brains are literally forced to rely on primitive, single piece of information shortcuts just to survive the overload. We simply do not have the time, the energy, or the cognitive capacity to recognize and analyze every single tiny aspect of every person, event, and situation we encounter. It's impossible. So what do? We use heuristics. These are mental rules of thumb to classify things according to just a few key features. And when one of those specific features is present in our environment, boom, we respond without even thinking. All right, here is our cognitive map for today's explainer. We're breaking down the anatomy of automatic behavior and the specific weapons used to exploit it. We'll be hitting the click-whir response, the rule of reciprocity, commitment and consistency, the social proof trap, the science of liking, and finally how to defend yourself against all of this. Starting off with Section 1, the click-whir response, the anatomy of automatic behavior. Let's start with a kind of crazy idea that humans actually have pre-programmed behavioral tapes, very much like animal instincts, and emotional triggers can entirely bypass our critical thinking. To really grasp this, consider the mother turkey. She is a wonderful, highly protective mother. But virtually all of her mothering behavior is triggered by just one single thing: the cheep, cheep sound of her chicks. Animal behaviorist M.W. Fox actually demonstrated this with a stuffed replica of a polecat, which is the turkey's natural mortal enemy. Now, normally, the mother turkey would viciously attack it on sight. But when he took that same stuffed polecat and hid a small recorder inside, playing a cheep, cheep sound, the mother turkey didn't just accept her enemy. She actually gathered it underneath her to keep it warm. The second the recorder was turned off, she attacked it again. It's like a tape player. Click. The appropriate tape is activated, whir, and out rolls the standard sequence of behaviors. She acts like a blind automata, completely triggered by one single specific feature. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, well, that's just a silly bird. But we humans have our very own cheep, cheep triggers. And sociologist Ellen Langer proved this brilliantly with her famous Xerox machine experiment. She simply asked to cut in line to use a copier. When she asked, "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine?" Only about 60% of people complied. But when she added a reason, saying, "Because I'm in a rush," compliance shot all the way up to 94%. But here is the absolutely fascinating part. She did a third test where she just said, "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine because I have to make some copies?" Think about that. She provided absolutely no real new information, no actual justification. You're at a copier, of course you have to make copies. Yet 93% of people still agreed. The mere presence of the word "because" was our human cheap. It triggered an automatic compliance response, completely bypassing critical thought. So the crucial takeaway here is that compliance professionals, whether we're talking about marketers, salespeople, or just everyday negotiators, they use specific principles as trigger features to get us to press play on our automatic compliance tapes. They totally understand the mechanics of our shortcuts. We've got reciprocation, commitment and consistency, social proof, liking, authority, and scarcity. For the rest of today, we are really going to drill down into the first 4 on this list to understand exactly how our environment is rigged to exploit our psychology. Moving right along to Section 2, the rule of reciprocity, the old give and take. Let's look at how the incredibly deep-seated human urge to repay debts can be heavily leveraged against us. Think about how this rule works in everyday life. Have you ever gotten a piece of mail from a charity you've never supported, and inside there's a little unsolicited gift? Like a sheet of personalized address labels. Or maybe you've experienced the absolute panic of receiving a beautiful, unexpected holiday card from a neighbor at the last minute, sending you into a frenzy to get even by scrambling to send them a card or gift in return. These uninvited gifts trigger an overpowering obligation to receive, effectively handing all the power over to the gift giver. For example, the Disabled American Veterans Organization found that a simple, standard mail appeal got an 18% response rate. But when they threw in those unsolicited address labels, the success rate nearly doubled to 35%. You didn't ask for the labels, but the societal obligation to receive them creates an uninvited debt. In fact, in Japanese, one of the words for thank you, sumimasen, literally translates to "this will not end." That is the staggering power of reciprocity. We also see reciprocity weaponized in the form of reciprocal concessions. This is huge in sales and negotiations. Let's say a Boy Scout walks up to you and asks you to buy a $5 ticket to some weekend event. You say, "No, maybe it's a bit steep or you're just genuinely busy." Then he says, "Well, if you can't buy a ticket, how about buying a $1 chocolate bar?" And suddenly, out of nowhere, you find yourself buying a chocolate bar you didn't even want. Why does that work? Because the Boy Scout made a concession. He retreated from a large request to a smaller one. The rule of reciprocity dictates that because he made a concession to you, you feel an overpowering psychological obligation to make a concession in return. And the crazy, secret side effect of this rejection then retreat technique is that the victims actually walk away feeling a greater sense of responsibility for and satisfaction with the final arrangement. It's wild. Up next is Section 3, Commitment and Consistency, Hobgoblins of the Mind. Let's explore why we so often act in ways that are totally contrary to our own best interests, just to appear consistent. Have you ever noticed how bettors at a racetrack act? The very moment after they place a bet, they suddenly become far more confident in their horse's chances of winning. Before the bet, they are unsure, sweating, weighing the odds. But the second that $2 ticket is in their hand, they are remarkably optimistic. Now, nothing about the horse has changed. The track is the same, the odds are the same, but the bettors have changed. Establishing an initial commitment literally traps us into self-justification. Once a stand is taken, our brains immediately go into overdrive, building rationalizations to prove that we made the right choice. We will literally fool ourselves just to keep our thoughts and beliefs consistent with what we have already done. It is an unbelievably potent weapon of social influence. And this human quirk elegantly explains why certain compliance professionals absolutely love what's called the lowball technique. Used car salespeople are notorious for exploiting this. Here is exactly how it plays out. They offer a customer an incredibly great deal on a car. Let's say it's $400 below the competitors. The customer is thrilled and agrees to buy it. The salesperson then has the customer fill out a massive stack of paperwork, take the car for a long test drive, and really start emotionally owning the vehicle. Then, oh no, something happens. An error is mysteriously discovered in the calculation, or the manager rejects the deal. The $400 discount is suddenly removed. The deal is now the exact same price as everywhere else, but remarkably, the customer almost always still buys the car. Why? Because during that window of time, the customer's brain built a dozen new reasons to justify the purchase. They convinced themselves the color is great, the handling is superb, the seats are comfortable. The original reason, the discount, was kicked completely away, but the commitment had already grown its own legs. Section 4. The social proof trap. Truths are us. Let's see how looking to others for behavioral cues can backfire tremendously. We've all heard of the safety in numbers fallacy, right? The idea that if everyone else is doing it, it must be the right thing to do. We subconsciously determine what is correct by finding out what other people think is correct. Think about television executives and their absolute obsession with fake canned laughter. Even though audiences constantly say they hate it and creators find it incredibly insulting to their work, executives still use it because, frankly, it works. The principle of social proof dictates that if we hear others laughing, our autopilot kicks in and subconsciously determines the material is funny, completely regardless of the joke's actual quality. We just assume that if a lot of people are doing something, they must know something we don't. But this reliance on the crowd becomes incredibly dangerous in ambiguous situations. Let's look at a stunning historical example from Singapore. An unexpected bus strike left an abnormally large crowd waiting at a bus stop, which just so happened to be located right in front of a highly respected local bank. Passers-by saw this massive, frustrated gathering, and, experiencing uncertainty, they did what we all do. They looked to the crowd for social proof. They completely misread the situation, mistaking the delayed bus crowd for a mob of panicked customers trying to withdraw their funds from a failing bank. So what did those passers-by do? They panicked, got in line themselves, and started withdrawing their own deposits. This triggered even more people to join in. Purely out of misguided social proof, they created a real massive run on the bank that actually forced it to close its doors to prevent a complete financial crash. Talk about the power of the crowd.
Which brings us to Section 5, the science of liking, the friendly thief.
Now we arrive at a remarkably simple but devastatingly effective tool. It's just a fact that we strongly prefer to say yes to people we know and like. Compliance practitioners actively manufacture this liking using several very specific triggers: physical attractiveness, claiming similarity to us, offering praise, increasing familiarity, and associating themselves with positive things. This perfectly explains the shared genius and the intense, uncomfortable pressure of Tupperware parties. The Tupperware Corporation knows that you might easily shut the door on a random salesperson, but at a Tupperware party, you aren't buying from a stranger. You are buying from your friend, the host, who you know is getting a cut of the profits. The warmth, the social bond, the similarity, it all combines to make saying no feel like a betrayal. The professionals make us their friends, or they cleverly leverage the friends we already have to influence us. But what happens when a pre-existing friend isn't available? Well, the professionals will just manufacture the affinity from scratch. Take Joe Girard, recognized by the Guinness Book of World Records as the world's greatest car salesman. He built his legendary career on a painfully simple tactic. Every single month, he sent 13,000 greeting cards to his former customers. The holiday theme on the front would change, but the message inside never, ever varied. It simply read, "I like you," followed by his name. It sounds almost ridiculous, doesn't it? But pure, unabashed flattery easily bypasses our critical thought. We humans are absolute suckers for praise. Even when we know the flatterer wants something from us, it still works to increase our liking for them, and consequently, our willingness to comply with their requests. And finally, Section 6, defending against influence, resetting the autopilot. We are living in an information-saturated environment that is practically custom-built to exploit our psychological shortcuts. So how on earth do we survive this? The ultimate key here is moving from that automatic single-feature response to a state of conscious awareness. This is what psychologists call controlled responding, because awareness reduces manipulation. When we truly understand the mechanics of persuasion, we can literally catch ourselves in the act of being manipulated. Now, we don't have to abandon our shortcuts entirely. We absolutely need them to function and not get overwhelmed in the modern world. But we do need to know exactly when to disengage the autopilot and take the controls back into our own hand. Listen, rather than trying to exhaust yourself blocking out every single persuasion tactic you encounter all day long, we must simply let them wash over us. Let them happen, but use their very momentum as your alarm bell. Cialdini identifies 2 physiological signals we should really look out for. First, stomach signs. When you feel that tightening pit in your stomach because you are being pushed by commitment and consistency pressures into agreeing to something you know you don't want to do, stop. That is your cue. Listen to your gut. Second, your heart of hearts. If you are deep in a transaction and you ask yourself, knowing what I know now, if I could magically go back in time, would I make this same commitment? If the very first flash of feeling you get is regret, it is time to back out. Do not let a foolish need for consistency ruin your decision making. I am going to leave you with this ultimate defense question to ask yourself the next time you're making a big decision, especially in a high-pressure sales environment. Say you're buying a car from a guy named Deal and Dan, and he's offered you coffee, made you laugh, and seemingly fought his manager tooth and nail for a better price. Before you sign anything, just pause and ask yourself, in the 25 minutes I've known this person, have I come to like them more than I expected? If the answer is yes, you've been tipped off. It is time to separate the seller from the deal. Realize that dealing Dan doesn't come with the car. By actively understanding how these principles of reciprocation, consistency, social proof, and liking are working behind the scenes, you can finally take your mind off autopilot and make truly conscious decisions. So the next time you find yourself about to say yes when you really meant no, what tape is actually playing in your head?
If there's one idea to take from this book is this: most persuasion doesn't feel like persuasion. That's what makes it powerful. Influence shows that people often don't carefully analyze every decision. Instead, they react automatically to authority, to popularity, to urgency. And those reactions shape behavior more than logic does. That's why people buy things they don't need, agree when they want to refuse, follow crowds without questioning, not because they're irrational, but because the brain is designed to simplify decisions. But awareness changes things. The moment you recognize these patterns, you pause, you notice, you think before reacting, and that small pause can protect you from manipulation. If this made you see persuasion differently, like the video, subscribe to Bookworm, and stay aware. Because sometimes the strongest influence is the one you never notice.